welcome. Your your blog, Chromasia. Let's start talking about that because you've originally you ranked amongst the top 10 most influential blogs in the UK, which is quite some title, and you started it way back in 2004, which I think is probably well before blogging became this massive incline of trendiness to do. Would you recommend that as a way for new photographers getting into it to start? Would that be a starting point that you would still say?
Well, it really depends what you mean by starting point. In 2004, so this is pre-Flickr, pre-Facebook, pre-any social sharing platform, the only way to meet others and show and work was to set up a website. So when, in its heyday, when Chromasia was really popular, and that was probably around, at its most popular, sort of 2007, 2008, we were getting to like 15,000 visitors a day. Absolutely ludicrous amount of traffic. But what tended to happen there is, if you wanted to see somebody else's work, you would go to their website. Do you remember web rings? Did you ever come across those? It's basically a little link on your website that will take you to the next one in the ring. So it was kind of like almost like clandestine meeting places. You'd go to somebody else's photography den and you'd spend some time there, then you'd go to the next one. And the only kind of way to have a discussion was on your own website or on somebody else's website. There was no sharing platforms at all. So back then, if you wanted to be seen and come to prominence in a kind of non-traditional way, Photoblog was an absolute superb way of doing that. These days, not so much. There's talk in the old photoblogging community about resurrecting things. One of the guys pulling everything, a guy called Brandon Stone, is working on kind of trying to regenerate the community. But I think in terms of social influence now and getting recognised as a photographer, you need to be looking at Facebook, Instagram, Flickr, and all the social sharing platforms. Right, all of that said, I do think it's extremely useful to have your own blog, and there's a variety of reasons for that. I think for me, that the main reason is, well, there's several. One is it provides some sort of historical continuity. So if you're routinely producing content about your work, it's there and it's a historical document. But more than that, it encourages you to be reflective. So nobody writes for nobody. Everyone's writing for some sort of audience, and hopefully as you write a blog, your audience will become larger. But I think the key thing is it forces you to be reflexive about your practice. You have to sit and think about what you do. You have to look at your work critically. You have to look at it analytically. You have to be prepared to accept comments from people. So I think that sort of document, and it can be a blog. You can't really do that on Facebook. Everyone, yeah, great, or they don't say anything at all. And it's really not something I'd recommend if you're trying to improve your artistry or your photography. But a blog really does make you focus. So yes, I would recommend it.
So it's perhaps not the same tool that it used to be in promoting yourself to other photographers, but it's a way of proving your continuity in the photography land these days.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and there's a lot of sense having some sort of portfolio section on a website. So that might be part of a blog, or it might be part of a broader website. And there's certainly some sense in that, because then you have ultimate control over the content. You have control over comments. You have control over the appearance. And clearly it requires you spend some time becoming familiar with the software. So, for example, if it's a WordPress host, you need a decent theme that will showcase your work. But once you've got that out of the way, what you're doing is sort of saying, here's the best of my work. I want the world to see me. So, yes, it's useful for that as well.
Because essentially you have actually been in business now for well over a decade. So your blog is obviously a record of all of that past work that you put in, but what has kept you going through those years? Because people talk about this thing called grit these days, about putting in your 10,000 hours, but nobody talks about how what keeps the motivation going and what keeps you going through the longevity of business. Right.
I once read that the business of photography is 90% business and 10% photography. So before I became a photographer, I was an academic. I taught psychology in a UK university for 15 years, and that's actually been useful for photography. But when we started the business, I reckon I had more time for photography when I was doing a full-time other job than when I switched to doing a photography business. So the idea it's 90% and 10% to me actually sounds a little bit optimistic. And I'll be honest as well, I really hate the business side of photography. I hate marketing. I hate promoting myself. I'd just rather kind of just wander about, take photographs, work for the odd client here and there, teach workshops. The business side of photography is, there are people who enjoy it, and there are people who do very well at marketing and the business side of things. But for me, it just drives me nuts. So the longevity has got nothing to do with the business. It's to do with a passion for photography. Photography and a passion for teaching. I taught psychology. I went into commercial photography. The economic markets crashed across Europe and the world in 2008, the year after I decided I was going to be a professional photographer. And the bottom just fell out of commercial photography. So I went back to teaching. As I say, I taught psychology for 15 years. And I've now been teaching photography for 10 years. And I actually much prefer teaching photography. So passion for photography. And if you don't have that, then if you don't have passion, you can't sustain anything. So for me, passion about photography kind of makes up for the crappy business side of having to make a living. I'd love to be instantly wealthy. That would sort out my problems.
But talking about that, you've gone through all of these different phases of history. You've seen the crashes, you've seen the crisis, and where we are right now in the world. If you could photograph anything in the world right now, in our time, in place, in history, who, what, where, what would that be for you?
I know you sent me this question beforehand, and I really did try to come up with an answer to this. And I can't. There's some places I'd love to visit. So Porto is clearly one of those places. But places like, the lost city of Machu Picchu, I'd love to be standing on the hill as the sun comes up, looking down. And every photographer who's ever been there has taken the shot. But there's just something iconic about it. I'd love to take a photograph of Mount Everest. I don't want to climb it. I think I'm a little bit too old to get to the top. But, the idea of taking a photograph of these iconic places really appeals to me. But if I'm honest, there's no answer to the question because there isn't any particular thing. For me, and it's difficult to explain this without sounding like some sort of Zen Buddhist strange person. But for me, if I'm in the mood for taking photographs and if I'm concentrating, then it doesn't matter. If I'm walking around the streets of Blackpool or walking along the seafront or I'm visiting a new place for the first time, there's just something about the experience of looking at the world through a camera and just kind of organizing your perceptions of something through that visual medium, that it's just a really relaxing and enjoyable experience. So there's nothing in particular other than, I don't want to be doing the 90% business stuff. I want to be off doing the 10% photography stuff. I'm just concentrating and being in the zone, if you like. So nothing iconic or no particular person, just that process. Having the time to indulge taking photographs. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. Yes, it's obviously it's a sort of relaxation of a meditation state almost for you to go and do that. Yes. So yeah. You were saying that you enjoy teaching far more teaching photography than you do psychology, and you've taught all over the world, and you're going to be coming here to Porto to teach your world famous photography workshops that you've run everywhere else. What do you think is going to be different about running them in this city in Porto compared to anywhere else?
Well, I think some of my workshops, they're not that different. So if I'm teaching Photoshop, for example, when I first went out to Dubai for the first couple of years, I was teaching out there. They had me teaching Photoshop, and people were coming back after photographing the desert and camels and falcons, and I'd been teaching Photoshop. And when you're just doing Photoshop, it doesn't make a great deal of difference. I got very jealous about this and invented a whole load of new workshops so I could go and do the desert and the street shooting and everything else. But when it does make a difference is when you're doing things like street photography or landscape photography, particularly street photography. If you're not familiar with the place, you have to be quite careful about how you look. So I don't mean in terms of danger, but I mean in terms of interpreting what's going on. So I understand the Middle East. I understand markets in the Middle East, in Dubai, and I have a sense of how they work. I understand street photography in the UK. We lived in Bulgaria for 4 years, understanding of Bulgarian culture. So I think one of the things I'm most looking forward to is just experiencing a different culture. I've not been to Portugal before. I've not been to Porto. So it's an area of Europe that I'm not that familiar with. So I think it will be different because it's new to me. And I think what I then bring to the workshops is as well. It's very difficult. It's always easier to photograph things that are unfamiliar because your attention is drawn in a way that the familiar you kind of gloss over. So they always photographing your hometown is one of the hardest places to photograph because you know everything. You don't see it anymore. So yeah, I think that's mostly the novelty in somewhere different and somewhere interesting. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
I think that's the biggest thing that I've been, when people are talking to me about your workshops here, I've been saying to them that this is so exciting because you have never been here before and it's the very first time of seeing something. So this experience is never going to happen again. Even when the festival runs again, this is never going to happen in this same way because this is the first time to stand next to you as you're seeing these wonderful things.
I think it's interesting. That does help with workshops as well. You'd think that if you know something really well, it makes it easier to teach, but sometimes it doesn't. Because if you're doing street photography in for example, location that you know very well with people that you know very well, you kind of switch into sort of semi-automatic mode. So the thought processes that you're verbalizing to the people on the workshop are not the same as if you're in a new place and you're thinking about, well, what's going on over there? I'm not entirely sure I understand those interactions and how does that work? And being there for the first time, you can bring that freshness because that's what they're experiencing. If people are learning about street photography for the first time, not clued to look for, they're not clued in how to approach people, how to. So yeah, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it.
So are we, yes. And in your workshop collection, you teach a workshop called Creating Dramatic Images. But what is a dramatic image to you? What does that mean to you?
Well, it can mean different things. On the face of it, it means an image that's eye-catching and striking. But I think it's really all the stuff that goes behind that that's important. So one of the things that I often say when I'm teaching post-production, and I particularly when I'm mentoring, so I've got some students who are working over kind of a long period of time, the way to think about a photograph, and this goes right from the point of composing the shot, pressing the shutter, and then doing post-production. The way to think, if you were going to paint this, how would you have painted it? So if you end up with kind of a strange telegraph pole coming out of somebody's head, then you wouldn't paint that. But it goes all the way through to the tiniest of details. So when we're thinking about post-production, it's like, well, what's that little bright stone doing down there in the bottom right-hand corner? If you're painting this, would you have added that kind of little feature? Does it add something to the story? So really creating dramatic images is taking control of the process. So maybe another way of thinking about this is that the difference between a snapshot and art is that art is intentional. So there should be nothing unintentional about photography. So, you can grab a good shot by accident. If you happen to be pointing your camera at something and you've got your motor drive running and you end up with some wonderful thing that you didn't know was going to happen, then that's fine as well. But generally speaking, even for street photography with people, but certainly for landscapes and architecture and the kind of slower forms of photography, really what you need to be doing is saying every single pixel in this frame is there because that's how I choose it to look. And that goes right from taking the shot all the way through the post-production. So creating dramatic images is, as much as anything else, it's about taking control. It's about what you need to be thinking about to do that. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I love the fact that you've explained that in a way that explains that you're not just about being there, taking the photo. It doesn't end at the shutter click. It's all about the full process.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about post-production, particularly when Photoshop first came out. There were people say, "Oh, you can't do that; that's cheating." But if you look at the history of photography, you look at some of Ansel Adams' contact prints, the wishy-washy grey things that you would kind of, if you'd have taken them on a digital camera, you would throw them away. But his strength, of course, was this notion of pre-visualization, that he could see a scene, he could interpret it through the negative and then through the print. So post-production has always been around, and control over the image creation process is what delineates photography from taking a snapshot. So photography is artistic, it has intent.
I love that, especially when you are taking photos of images that have been taken time and time again that are iconic, but it's the interpretation in the final image that really is what you're talking about here, is what makes it art.
Yes, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we know that you're going to be over here in September, but what are you most looking forward to about coming here?
I think because it's somewhere new. I love running workshops. A lot of the time, my photography is quite solitary, and I think that's true for every photographer. You spend time on your own, and kind of observing the world and taking photographs. But workshops are different. So I love coming together with particularly big events like this one, where you come together with like-minded people. The people are coming there because they're enthusiastic. They want to. You get your fellow instructors. It's just a great way of celebrating. It's a hobby for some people, a profession for others, but it's a great way of celebrating photography, to come together with like-minded people and just to spend time doing photography. So it's that aspect I'm most looking forward to.
And we're very much looking forward to seeing you as well. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to me.